How's it going, guys? So, there's a fairly interesting fight coming up in the light heavyweight division in a couple of weeks. Former two-time super middleweight champion Robert Stieglitz is going to be taking on Nikola Sjekloca. Now, for those of you who listening to this who don't know who Nikola Sjekloca is, or if you do know who he is and you've just looked at his record and whatnot, you'd probably think that this was a mismatch, an easy fight. I mean, because Nikola Sjekloca has 4 defeats on his record and doesn't really have many noteworthy victories. However, if you followed his career, then you would know that the only defeats on Nikola Sjekloca's record were at a very high level. Okay, let's talk about the guys that have beaten Nikola Sjekloca. So you've got Sakio Bika. We all know who Sakio Bika is. That's a guy who's given people like Joe Calzaghe and Andre Ward very difficult fights. He was a WBC super middleweight champion at one point. In fact, Nikola Sjekloca against Bika, they actually fought for the interim title, I believe, and then Sakio Bika fought for the full belt after that and won it against Periban. So that was Sjekloca's first defeat. Sakio Bika, it was a decision. It was fairly competitive, so I don't really think that we can read too much into that. Okay, Sakio Bika is or at least back then he was a top level super middleweight. Okay, it wasn't long after his fight he had against Andre Ward, which was a very close fight. So yeah. He also lost to Arthur Abraham, who at the time was a top level super middleweight as well. You know, Arthur Abraham is a multiple time world champion himself. You know, a guy that was a long time reigning middleweight champion who moved up, fought in the Super 6, and then after the Super 6 went on to win a world title. So, yeah, Arthur Abraham, there's no shame losing to someone like him. And the other 2 defeats on his record, one was against Callum Smith. Now, what's interesting about that is Callum Smith is a guy who is known for blowing people away. Okay, his punching power is phenomenal. I mean, look what he did to unbeaten Rocky Fielding. Look what he did to seasoned veterans like Muhammadi, for example. He can blow guys away in a round. Well, Nikola Sjekloca was able to go the distance with Callum Smith and actually was able to give him a fight. So, it's very commendable there. Clearly, Sjekloca is a durable, tough customer. And then after that, in his very next fight, he fought unbeaten, now world champion, Tyrone Zoig. Tyrone Zoig, of course, went on to defeat Giovanni Di Carolus for the world title. He's the reigning WBA super middleweight champion now. So, let's be real, guys. Nikolai Shalaka, he's only lost to top level competition. Okay, he hasn't lost to anybody that's a journeyman or that's just a fringe contender. The guys he's lost to are guys that most people lose to. Like I said, I mean the last 2 guys that beat him, Tyrone Zoig and Callum Smith, were both unbeaten. Top level super middleweights. Callum Smith is the mandatory for the WBC, and Tyrone Zoig is the WBA champion, and both guys are known for their power. So and both fights went the distance. So Nikola Sjekloca, he's no journeyman, put it that way, okay? The guy's a tough, durable guy who comes to fight. Since his defeat against Zoig, he's coming off a 4-fight winning streak. The Zoig fight was in 2015, I believe, and since then he's had some, stoppage victories. I think his last fight went the distance, actually. The guys are not top-level competition, they're just journeymen, but still, he's on a winning streak. He's picked up one of them, Mickey Mouse WBC straps. I think it's the WBC Mediterranean title, something like that. This fight's going to be for the light heavyweight title. Although Shalaka is more experienced at fighting at super middleweight, I don't think it's going to be an issue here because Robert Stieglitz himself fought the majority of his career at super middleweight and really doesn't have the kind of power to suit him in the light heavyweight division. So it's going to be a good fight, and I'm expecting a long fight that could potentially go the distance. However, I am picking Robert Stieglitz to win this fight. Now, guys, Robert Stieglitz has been a favourite fighter of mine for a long time because he's one of these guys who, he was a top level super middleweight for so long. He was avoided by so many guys that it got to a point where he kind of went under the radar. I mean, he had a very, very long reign as WBO super middleweight champion. He even lost and then regained his title against Arthur Abraham. In fact, one thing that I always point out when I talk about Stieglitz is the only fighter to this date to have a stoppage victory over Arthur Abraham. Okay, nobody else even came close to stopping Arthur Abraham. Carl Froch couldn't stop him. Gilberto Ramirez couldn't stop him. You know, Andre Ward couldn't stop him. You know, who else beat Abraham? Andre Durrell couldn't stop him. None of those guys who are supposedly elite level super middleweights, none of those guys were even able to come close to getting a stoppage against Abraham. And Robert Stieglitz stopped Abraham in 3 rounds in their second fight. It was on an accumulation, you know. He busted up his eye and got the stoppage, but he really gave Abraham a battering. Honestly, I would recommend that fight to any of you guys if you want to know what Stieglitz is all about. You know, he's a seriously hard customer to fight, man. I mean, the guy's got so much heart and stamina. And you know, he's a guy who kind of, according to him in some of his interviews, he kind of modelled his style after Joe Calzaghe, and you can kind of see that with the way that he throws his punches. You know, he throws punches in bunches. He very rarely throws a single shot. He's all about combinations, this guy. Now, he had a couple of defeats earlier in his career. He was stopped against Labredo Andrade. And he was also stopped in a rematch against Alejandro Barrio. He actually stopped Alejandro Barrio in their first fight. He destroyed him, but then they had a rematch and he got stopped himself. And you know, in those fights, I felt Stieglitz to me, and you know, I've seen those fights, and to me he was a little bit reckless in those fights, and that's a tendency that Stieglitz has. You know, he has a tendency to be very reckless in the ring and make a lot of silly mistakes. And you know, that's actually what cost him in the third Arthur Abraham fight, because that fight again, it was very, very close. You know, Stieglitz was outworking Abraham. Abraham was landing the harder shots, being the bigger, you know, bigger built, stronger man. And but Stieglitz was still in that fight all the way, but then he ended up getting caught in the 12th round, getting knocked down, and you know, it was a split decision and he lost it. But you know, he could have won that fight, man, if he did just kept his composure. In the sixth fight, however, the fourth fight, however, with Arthur Abraham, Stieglitz to me looked absolutely shop worn. You know, he was coming off a fight he had with Felix Sturm, which was a absolute blockbuster of a fight, man. That was a pure back and forth war. That fight was with Felix Sturm, and it took a lot out of both guys. And I think Robert Stieglitz, you know, that fight, just fighting Arthur Abraham so soon after that, wasn't wise, and he ended up getting stopped. But you know, he's moved up to light heavyweight now, and he's looking okay. His last fight, he fought the European champion Mehdi Amar, who was significantly bigger and taller than Stieglitz. But Stieglitz, you know, used his superior boxing skill and outboxed the guy. And I thought he looked, you know, looked decent in the fight. Well, it wasn't great, but he looked decent. You know, I downloaded that fight and I've got it archived because I don't know. It was one of those fights I like to watch because Stieglitz, you know, like I said, he's been a fighter who I've been watching for so long, and to see him come back at 35 years old, and after all the ups and downs he's had in his career, to win the European light heavyweight title, I think it really is commendable. I'm expecting him to beat Nikola Sjekloca though, and the reason why is because I just think that out of these two guys, I think that Robert Stieglitz he's proven his worth at world level, let's say, because Nikola Sjekloca, you know, he's a fighter who, you know, he looks very good at a lower level, but, like, you know, when he steps up to fight a top 10 super middleweight, doesn't tend to win, tends to lose on points. And I think Robert Stieglitz, being the more experienced guy, you know, the fact that he's proven himself as a world-class fighter, you know, he's, like I said, he's beaten people like Arthur Abraham, and Alejandro Barrio, you know, these are all, you know, world level super middleweights. So you know, I just think that, you know, he brings more to the table. Plus, this fight's taking place in Germany, where Robert Stieglitz is based. He's actually from Russia, Robert Stieglitz, but he's lived most of his life in Germany. He's fought most of his career in Germany. So you know, I'm expecting, you know, if the fight's close, if it's one of those fights that could go either way, perhaps he'll have the edge on the scorecards, but I don't think it'll be that significant. I do think that Robert Stieglitz should outbox Shalaka, but I'm expecting Shalaka to bring it, and I'm expecting him to give a good account of himself. So it's going to be interesting, this one. Yeah, I'm going to go with Robert Stieglitz to win a unanimous decision. I think he's going to win clearly on points. However, honestly, after this fight, I don't really know where Robert Stieglitz goes from here, because there's talks of him facing off against Eric Skoglund, because I believe Eric Skoglund, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe that Eric Skoglund from Sweden is the mandatory challenger for the European title at the moment, and honestly, I don't like that fight for Stieglitz. I don't think he can beat Eric Skoglund at this stage. I think that, I mean, it's possible, but I think Eric Skoglund to me is a natural light heavyweight, whereas Robert Stieglitz is a guy that was his best days are behind him, and his best days were at super middleweight. So yeah, I don't really think there's any point in that fight. Plus, I can't see Robert Stieglitz posing a threat to any of the light heavyweight champions right now. I mean, if he was to fight Andre Ward, I would love to have seen that fight years ago back at super middleweight. I think Stieglitz actually wanted that fight. There was several talks about that fight when Ward was with Dan Goosen. I remember seeing an interview with Ward where he brought up that Robert Stieglitz was one of the proposed fights from Dan Goosen that Dan Goosen was trying to set up for him, because Stieglitz was the WBO champion then, but it never materialised for whatever reason. But if the fight were to happen now, I just think Ward would take him apart methodically, because Stieglitz just he's shot worn at this stage. I mean, he's been in too many hard fights, too many wars. The Abraham fights took a lot out of him. The Sturm fight took a heck of a lot out of him, and it's just he's a fighter who's made fights harder than they needed to be based on his style. He's made them harder by coming forward and taking a lot of unnecessary risks. So yeah, hopefully he beats Nikola Sjekloca. It'd be a good way to end his career, but I really don't know where he goes from here. I honestly don't. He could be a gatekeeper at light heavyweight, but I don't see him being a top level fighter or a world champion. The only guy at light heavyweight that he could possibly defeat, I'm not saying he'll do it, but he could possibly give a decent fight to, would be Nathan Cleverly. I don't rate Nathan Cleverly, don't rate him at all. I've never rated him. That Jürgen Bremer fight, in my opinion, and you can fucking hate on me all you want, there was something dodgy about that fight, man. I think that fight was fixed. I think Sauerland and Eddie Hearn were trying to fucking play a fast one there, and maybe talk about that in another video, but whatever. Let me know what you guys think. I'm going with Robert Stieglitz to win a decision against Shalaka. I mean, let me make one thing clear. I don't think that Stieglitz would beat Cleverly. I just think that if there's anybody at light heavyweight that he could beat, that he could potentially pick up a belt from, he ain't gonna beat any of the other guys. Okay, it's Cleverly or nobody. So let me know what you guys think, and thanks for watching.